How dare you embarrass me in front of everyone? Those were the words that thundered through the hospital hallway, followed by the sharp crack of a slap that silenced every nurse and patient nearby. A pregnant woman clutched her swollen belly, tears streaming, as her husband towered over her with fury in his eyes. Hello, family. Welcome back. Before we dive into this emotional story, I have one request. Please subscribe. Your support is what keeps these stories alive. Every time you click that button, you help us share voices that deserve to be heard. And let us know in the comments where you're watching from, because what you're about to hear is deeper than you think. The city of Venton prided itself on luxury and prestige, and nowhere was that clearer than in the glass and marble corridors of St. Eloria's Medical Center. Everything gleamed: polished floors, spotless white walls, and nurses in crisp uniforms gliding from room to room. To most, it was a sanctuary of healing. To her, it was a place where her worst humiliation would unfold. Clara Bennett sat quietly on the hospital bed, one hand resting protectively over her belly. She was in her 8th month, her breathing shallow, her heart pounding from more than just the weight she carried. She should have felt safe here. Instead, her palms trembled against the sheets, waiting for her husband's temper to snap like a whip. Jonathan Bennett, wealthy businessman, well known in Venton's elite, stood near the window, his suit immaculate, his phone buzzing in his hand. He scrolled without looking at her, his jaw tight, his eyes cold. Even here, in a hospital meant for healing, his pride walked in first. "Jonathan," Clara whispered, her voice fragile, "the doctor said stress isn't good for the baby. Please." His head snapped toward her, and before she could finish, he slammed his phone onto the bedside table. The sound made her flinch. He stepped closer, his shoes clicking against the floor with deliberate menace. "Stress," he barked, his voice echoing through the sterile room. "You're the one causing stress!" Whining about every little thing, crying like the world owes you sympathy. "Do you know how many people envy you for being married to me?" Clara shrank back against the pillows. She opened her mouth to speak, but her words dissolved in her throat. And then it happened. His palm cut across her cheek with a sharp slap that rang through the ward. The sting seared, and she gasped, clutching her belly as pain and shock collided inside her. Down the hall, a nurse froze, her chart clutched against her chest. Another whispered to her colleague, eyes darting nervously toward the room. They had seen things before, but no one dared intervene. Not with Jonathan Bennett, the man who funded hospital wings, who dined with politicians, who owned half the city's boardrooms. Clara's lips quivered as she whispered, "Please, not here, not in front of the baby." Jonathan leaned closer, his shadow falling across her face. His voice dropped lower, but the venom dripped heavier. "You think anyone cares about your whining? You think anyone will believe you? Look at me, Clara. You're nothing without me." Nothing. Her tears blurred the sterile white room into streaks of gray. She pressed a trembling hand against her cheek, the echo of the slap still ringing in her ears. For a brief moment she wished she could disappear into the walls, away from his fury, away from the eyes that pretended not to see. Outside the door, a young intern whispered, "Should we call security?" The head nurse shook her head grimly. "No one touches him. Do you want to lose your job?" So the hallway stayed silent, the walls bearing witness to cruelty they could not stop. Clara's heart pounded. The baby shifted inside her as though sensing the storm outside. She breathed in sharp gasps, willing herself to stay calm, to protect the fragile life within her. But deep inside, a seed of anger began to grow, a whisper of defiance she had never allowed herself to feel before. She didn't know it yet, but the man who thought he was untouchable was about to face a reckoning he never saw coming. The slap wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. Clara sat hunched on the bed, her hand pressed to her cheek, tears dripping onto her hospital gown. Jonathan paced the room like a caged predator, his expensive shoes clicking against the tile with a rhythm that made her chest tighten. He thrived on the silence of staff who turned away, of patients who pretended not to hear, of a wife who had been trained to swallow her pain. "Look at you," he snarled, stopping in front of her. His eyes burned with contempt, his lips twisted in a sneer. "Crying in a hospital room like some weak beggar." Do you know how embarrassing this is for me? For me! He jabbed his finger into his own chest. I built an empire, Clara. I carry this family. And what do I get in return? Complaints. Whimpers. You dragging me into some clinic like I don't have more important things to do. Clara's breath caught. I didn't drag you here. The doctor. Crash! He swept his hand across the table, sending a tray of medical tools clattering to the floor. The metallic clinks echoed down the hall like tiny screams. Clara flinched, her belly tightening painfully. She folded over, clutching herself. Don't do this, she whispered, her voice breaking. The baby, please. Jonathan's face flushed crimson. He leaned close, his shadow swallowing her whole. The baby? That's all you care about? You think that baby will save you? You think being a mother will give you power? Let me tell you something, Clara. He gripped her chin so hard she whimpered. Nothing saves you from me. Nothing. Her tears streamed freely now. She tried to twist away, but his grip only tightened. Her breathing grew shallow. Her chest rose and fell in frantic bursts. From outside, faint whispers carried down the corridor. A nurse hissed under her breath. We can't just stand here. The head nurse shook her head again, eyes darting nervously. He owns this city. One wrong move and this hospital is finished. And so, behind those glass doors, Clara suffered alone. Jonathan released her chin suddenly, shoving her back against the pillows. Pathetic, he muttered. He straightened his suit jacket, his rage simmering just beneath the surface. He turned toward the door as if the entire outburst had been nothing but a minor inconvenience. But Clara wasn't the same as she had been a moment ago. The pain and humiliation hardened into something else, something hotter. Her trembling slowed. She lifted her eyes, glassy but steady, and said the words she'd been too afraid to voice. You can hurt me, Jonathan. You can break everything in this room. But one day you'll answer for this. Her defiance hit him harder than the slap he had delivered. His head whipped back toward her, eyes widening at the audacity. A dark laugh bubbled from his chest. Answer? To who? To these doctors? He gestured toward the door. They fear me. To this city? They bow to me. To your father? He scoffed. That old man is nothing. Nothing. And then the door opened. The air in the room shifted like a storm breaking. Standing in the doorway was a man with silver hair and steady eyes that burned with a fury years in the making. William Carter. Clara's father, a retired steelworker, his back still straight, his presence commanding in a way no boardroom or fortune could imitate. For a long beat, silence stretched. Jonathan's smirk faltered. Clara's breath caught. The nurses who had been frozen outside leaned forward, whispering like a wave. Dad! Clara's voice cracked, soft and desperate. Tears spilled again, but this time they weren't just of fear. They were of relief. William's gaze moved from his daughter's swollen belly to the red mark blooming on her cheek to the arrogant man standing too close. His jaw tightened. His fists curled. And then his voice, deep, raw, shaking with restrained rage, cut through the sterile air like steel. You laid your hands on my daughter? The words weren't loud. They didn't need to be. Every syllable carried decades of strength, every pause heavy with the promise of consequence. Nurses peered from the hall. Patients stirred from their rooms. For the first time, Jonathan Bennett looked unsettled. Clara clutched her father's gaze, her lip trembling. Dad, I saw enough, William said, his voice steady as iron. His eyes locked onto Jonathan. You can buy silence. You can buy fear. But you can't buy me. Jonathan stepped forward, forcing a smirk. William, calm down. This is a family matter. Family? William's voice thundered now, shaking the walls, drawing people closer to the doorway. You don't lay a finger on family. Not my family. Not ever again. The fire that Jonathan thought he owned flickered for the first time. Because in that moment, the hospital wasn't his empire anymore. It was William's battlefield. And every witness in those white walls was about to see a reckoning unfold. The room was no longer silent. The air vibrated with William Carter's words, and for the first time in his life, Jonathan Bennett looked cornered. William stepped fully into the room, closing the door behind him with a deliberate click. Each step forward echoed with authority, like a judge walking into a courtroom. Clara clung to the sheets, her chest rising and falling as tears streaked her face. But this time, she wasn't crying alone. Jonathan straightened his shoulders, trying to recover the confidence slipping through his fingers. "William, you're making a scene. This is a hospital, for God's sake." "My wife is emotional. She exaggerates." Slam! William's fist came down on the side table so hard, the water pitcher jumped and toppled, spilling across the floor. His voice roared, filling every corner of the sterile room. "Don't you dare lie to me!" The hallway outside went dead silent. Nurses froze mid-step, patients strained to listen. The sound was a gavel cracking down, and everyone in earshot knew a trial had just begun. William's eyes, sharp and burning, locked on Jonathan. "I saw your hand." I saw the mark on her face, and I'll say this once. You'll never raise your hand against my daughter again, not while I breathe. Jonathan sneered, though his jaw tightened. "You think you can threaten me? Do you know who I am? Do you know how many judges and mayors owe me favors?" He took a step closer, puffing out his chest. "One word from me, and you'll lose everything you have." But William didn't flinch. He leaned in so close their noses almost touched. His voice dropped, lower now, but hotter, like coal burning beneath the surface. "I already lost too much in this life. Friends, brothers, nights of sleep working steel so my children could eat. But I will never lose my daughter to a coward in a suit." Clara's breath hitched. The room blurred with her tears, but her father's voice cut through like light. Jonathan scoffed, searching the room for support. His eyes darted to the nurses at the door. "You all hear this? He's unhinged. He's threatening me in front of witnesses." But the nurses didn't move. Their eyes had shifted, from fear of Jonathan to something else. Quietly, one of them whispered, "He's right. We saw everything." Another nodded, biting her lip, courage flickering alive. William's gaze swept to them briefly, then back to Jonathan. "You hear that? Even the walls won't protect you anymore." Jonathan's face flushed deep red. He lunged forward, finger raised to jab into William's chest. "Old man, you don't know who you're messing with." But before the finger landed, William caught his wrist mid-air. His grip was iron, forged by years in the mills, unshaken by boardrooms or bank accounts. Jonathan's eyes widened in shock as William's voice thundered. "You will not touch me. You will not touch her. You will not touch that child she carries. Not now. Not ever again." The hallway erupted in gasps. Doctors pressed closer to the glass. The head nurse, who had kept silent for too long, finally stepped forward, her voice trembling but firm. "Sir, we've documented everything. If she chooses to report, there will be records." Clara looked at her father, then at Jonathan, trembling but braver than before. "I will report it," she said, her voice cracking but clear. "I'm done being silent." Jonathan staggered back as though the words themselves had struck him. His empire, the silence he'd bought with money and fear, was cracking right there under the fluorescent lights. William released his grip, stepping back, his chest heaving with righteous fire. "You wanted power? Now you'll face the power of truth. And truth doesn't bow to you." The room buzzed, whispers spreading like wildfire down the hall. For the first time, Jonathan Bennett was not the untouchable king of Venton. He was a man exposed, stripped, and standing face to face with a father's fury that could burn down his empire. And the fire had only just begun. The sterile white walls of the hospital had never witnessed such a storm. Jonathan Bennett stood stiff, his face twisted with rage and disbelief. For years, he had ruled Venton with money, charm, and intimidation. But now, under these fluorescent lights, all of it was slipping through his fingers. William Carter didn't move like a man who was afraid. He moved like a man with nothing left to lose. He reached into his worn leather bag, the same one he'd carried since his factory days, and pulled out a folder thick with papers. He held it up for everyone to see. "You built your kingdom on lies," William said, his voice echoing like a hammer striking steel. "And I've been gathering the proof." Jonathan's eyes flickered, just for a second, betraying the calm mask he was trying to keep. He barked out a laugh, sharp and hollow. "Proof? What proof? You think anyone will believe some old man with a stack of papers? You're pathetic." But William wasn't rattled. He laid the folder on the bed tray and opened it wide. Inside were documents, bank transfers, company letters, contracts with forged signatures. He pulled out photos, too, glossy images that slid across the tray like daggers. Jonathan's face with other women, Jonathan's late-night meetings at hotels, Jonathan's business dinners that were more betrayal than work. Nurses craned their necks from the doorway. A doctor stepped closer, his jaw tightening as he scanned the papers. Jonathan's facade began to crack. "You've been bleeding companies dry," William thundered, "cheating investors, lying to your board. And when you weren't busy selling off your soul, you were busy destroying my daughter's life behind closed doors." Clara covered her mouth, tears spilling. Every photo, every page was confirmation of the whispers she'd heard late at night, the excuses Jonathan had always brushed aside. Her heart ached, but it also hardened. Jonathan lunged forward, grabbing at the folder, but William slapped his hand away with a strength that shocked the room. "Touch this and I'll break your arm," William growled. The fire in his voice made the nurses gasp. Jonathan's face turned scarlet. "You don't understand, old man. This will ruin everything. My reputation." "Good," William's voice boomed, shaking the walls. "A man who beats his wife and lives off lies deserves ruin. You thought your money could buy silence, but not today. Not here." From the hallway, phones were raised. Someone was recording. Jonathan's eyes darted, panic flashing for the first time. His empire was fragile, and William had struck right at the foundation. Clara's trembling eased as she sat taller on the bed. Her voice, though soft, carried strength. "I'm not afraid anymore. I'll stand by this truth. I'll stand by him, my father, not you." The declaration ripped the last shred of control from Jonathan's hands. His mouth opened, but no words came. For the first time in years, he was speechless. William pointed a finger at him, sharp as a blade. "You'll leave this hospital tonight in disgrace, and the whole city will know the truth about the man you really are." The crowd outside the door had grown. Nurses, doctors, patients, even visitors. All watching, all listening. Jonathan wasn't just losing his wife. He was losing his throne. And William Carter wasn't finished yet. The corridor outside Clara's room buzzed like a hive. Nurses whispered, patients leaned against doorframes, and visitors clutched their phones, recording every moment. Jonathan Bennett, once the untouchable king of Venton, stood cornered in a place where no money, no title, no influence could shield him. William Carter planted himself between Jonathan and his daughter's hospital bed, his chest rising and falling with steady fury. His silver hair glistened beneath the fluorescent lights, but his stance was unbreakable. He looked like a warrior who had waited his whole life for this one fight. "You think this is over?" Jonathan spat, his voice hoarse with desperation. "I can fix this. I can explain." William's laugh was bitter, sharp. "Explain? Go ahead. Explain why you laid your hands on my pregnant daughter. Explain those bank statements. Explain the pictures. Explain the screams we all heard from this room. Go on, Jonathan. The world is listening." The crowd's murmurs rose, a tide of disapproval crashing over him. Jonathan's confidence cracked further. He tugged at his tie, sweat streaking his forehead. His gaze darted wildly, searching for a single sympathetic face. But all he found were narrowed eyes and shaking heads. Clara, fragile but resolute, sat up against her pillows. She wiped her tears and stared at him, her voice trembling yet strong. "You told me I was nothing without you. But look at you now, nothing without your lies." The words sliced through him. He flinched like she'd struck him harder than any fist could. William stepped closer, his fingers stabbing the air. "You're done. You'll leave this hospital now. You won't touch her again. And by tomorrow morning, your name will be nothing but ash in this city." At that signal, 2 hospital security guards pushed through the crowd. Jonathan spun on them, his voice breaking into a shout. "Don't you dare put your hands on me! I'm Jonathan Bennett. Do you know who I am?" But the guards didn't hesitate. One gripped his arm, the other his shoulder. He struggled, shouting curses, his expensive suit twisting as they dragged him toward the hallway. Phones rose higher, flashes burst. His face, once plastered across magazines as a symbol of success, was now captured as a spectacle of disgrace. As he passed, patients booed. One nurse muttered, "Monster." Another whispered, "Finally." Jonathan thrashed, his voice echoing down the corridor. "Clara, you'll regret this. William, you'll regret this." But his words dissolved under the sound of jeers and the clicking of cameras. The image of his downfall was sealed forever. Back in the room, silence settled. Clara exhaled deeply, her shoulders shaking. William turned to her, his stern expression softening as he crossed the room. He knelt beside her bed, taking her trembling hand in his calloused palm. "You're safe now?" he whispered, his voice breaking with emotion. "He'll never hurt you again. Not while I'm here." Clara's tears spilled anew, but they were different this time. Not tears of fear, tears of release. She squeezed his hand, her voice fragile but filled with conviction. "I thought I had no one, but you stood up for me when I couldn't stand up for myself." William kissed her hand gently, his eyes glistening. "That's what fathers do. And one day, your child will know the strength of their mother, the woman who survived, who refused to stay silent." Outside the room, the last echoes of Jonathan's protests faded into nothing. The empire he thought eternal had collapsed under the weight of truth and the fire of a father's love. And in that sterile hospital room, amid beeping monitors and tired walls, justice had finally spoken, not in the voice of judges or politicians, but in the roar of a man who refused to let his daughter suffer another second in silence. And in that hospital, the untouchable man was finally touched by justice. He walked in thinking he owned the room, but he was dragged out in disgrace while the world watched. A slap may have started it, but a father's fury finished it. Now here's the real question for you. If you were Clara, would you ever forgive a man like Jonathan, or would you walk away forever with your child? Drop your honest answer in the comments, because I want to hear your voice. Before you go, don't just scroll past. Smash that subscribe button, turn on the notification bell, and share this story. Every time you do, you keep these voices alive, and you help us tell stories the world needs to hear. Trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next.